Good morning, everybody, and happy Mother's Day and celebration of all who serve the role of mother in someone's life, as we covered earlier. Now, if you have an overpowering need to hear more reasons to love your mother or reasons to forgive her, our brothers and sisters in the Western time zones are streaming about nothing else today. But further aglowers are not slaves to the traditional. We walk our own path, and today that path starts here.
Yep.
I recently saw a posting from a traditional Christian lamenting the end of times is nigh, that these are indeed the last days of the last days. And oddly enough, this is one of the few times our thinking shares some alignment. Well, at least until we look under the hood at exactly what the end of times looks like. For the traditional religions, the end of times usually involves some sort of biblical scale disaster wherein the chosen people are spared, called home to heaven, gifted with a foolproof call blocker app, or otherwise awarded by God. Damnation insurance is available from any of these factions for the low, low price of giving up any hope of inner peace or freedom of thought. Membership in the chosen people requires accepting someone else's definition of right without question or examination. Back on the farm, we called this buying a pig in a poke. Let the buyer beware. We have seen some extreme examples of the chosen losing their grip on reality in our times. In 1978, the People's Temple down in Guyana in Central America, 909 people committed suicide because they thought the end of times was nigh. 1993, more than 70 souls were lost when the Branch Davidians thought the end of times was nigh. 1997, 39 people committed suicide when they thought the earth was about to be recycled and they wanted to get a jump on the crowd. Accounts of these stories always include the names of the leaders, but I will not so honor their memory. I choose instead to remember the one thing they all have in common. They were wrong. None of these tragedies have been justified by the timely appearance of the apocalypse foretold. In each case, the sun came up the following day, the stock market cycled up and down, babies were born, and baseball games dragged on forever, unless your team was winning. Spirit, as we understand it in the science of mind, is an empowering belief. Spiritual love is expressed by trusting us to use it wisely and actually not even judging us if we do not use it wisely. Like so many cultists active today, these aforementioned charlatans dealt in fear and distrust. Excuse me a second, I'm having the screen roll. There we go. They created unattainable illusions of happiness, then convinced the unenlightened they were being cheated out of their share by some nebulous cadre of untouchable conspirators. 100 years ago, within the lifetime of my parents, and probably many of yours, the automobile industry, heavier than air flight, and telecommunications were in their infancy. These technological advances were poised to change the world in ways not seen since the introduction of gunpowder, and yet most of the world still existed quite happily in their ignorance without them. You would probably need to go to town to make a phone call, either traveling there on foot or propelled by a horse or a mule perhaps, and the number of people who had been in an airplane at that time would not have filled the seats of a modern football stadium. And everyone was okay with that because it was the only life they knew. Communally, we may have been skeptical of peoples we did not know, but then we didn't know many people. We may have called them devils because we believed in duality where good and evil can exist side by side, sharing power equally. But as we were forced by a shrinking world to expand our horizons, we have always found we are more alike than not. Those once perceived as devils turned out to be friends we just didn't know we had before then. And it was around this same time a new devil leapt upon the scene. This devil was more dangerous than any stranger ever encountered. This devil was an idea, a creation of humankind's use of free choice. Confined until now by the limited circulation of newspapers, magazines, and good old-fashioned word of mouth, marketing entered stage right, came into our homes on radio waves, and redefined happiness in our modern world. No longer were we content to go to sleep when it got dark. You see, the Joneses have electric lights. No longer were we content to sweep the floor with a corn broom. The Joneses have a vacuum cleaner. No longer were we content to drive our crank start automobile. The Joneses' car has an electric starter and a radio. After centuries of only inconsequential social changes, all of this was happening within a single lifetime. The shock to our common consciousness could only be matched by the disparity between indigenous peoples of the world and European colonists in the Age of Empire. This is how I define the end of days. This is the point in human history I recognize as when the new sheriff came to town. The end of days isn't coming. It's been here and gone. We are living in a new paradigm where change is not only normal but also happening under our feet so fast, reality has become a moving target. The hand-cranked phone on the general store wall has evolved into a powerful computer we carry in our pocket. We have more information at our fingertips than our ancestors had in their entire world. Indeed, all the knowledge of the world is at our disposal, if only we had the wherewithal to be able to discern fact from fiction. For those who have yet to recognize their true spiritual selves, who exist without being anchored to their spiritual nature, these are indeed trying times. We want to appear to have control over all this knowledge, something humans have never had to do before. Farmers knew the land they plowed. The blacksmith knew his metals. Someone's granny knew which plants healed and which ones witches used. But no one needed to know everything, and they were not expected to. Our expectations have grown in this past century like a violent chemical mixture in an undersized test tube. The vessel simply cannot contain the reaction. The end of days is nigh. The dystopian worlds depicted in popular science fiction have their creations founded in the breakdown of social order, where the gap between privileged and forgotten has grown beyond the tipping point of sustainability. Distrust of authority, distrust of media, disregard for law, and disdain for anyone outside the chosen caste are common symptoms. Sound familiar? The 2013 movie Elysium depicted a dystopian Earth where the elites had ascended from the planet's surface to live among the clouds, wanting for nothing in cities that floated in the air. The elites had fully embraced the manufactured illusion of happiness and simply denied their easy living came with any consequences. The other 99% lived among the ruins on the surface of the planet, ravaged by forgotten wars and decades of decay, surviving by their wits or dying young. The Hunger Games trilogy recounts a similar scenario where the population is divided into separate castes who all toil in misery and suspicion of each other to create the Shangri-La world of the ruling class, whose only job, it seems, is to enjoy themselves at the expense of others. And an early favorite of mine, 1972's Silent Running with Bruce Dern, where the last vestiges of natural vegetation from the Earth are being preserved by a small crew of astronauts and their robot helpers in giant geodomes in space, until the day comes that the powers that be decide it just isn't cost effective to maintain those habitats any longer. The common thread in all these stories is the unbreakable human spirit in the handful of heroes whose unity with divine spirit empowers them to see beyond the illusions of happiness and maintain focus on the true values in life. For anyone whose reality is anchored in mythologies penned to paper thousands of years ago, today's world of information at the speed of Twitter can only leave them feeling hopelessly powerless and alone. Coupled now with the burgeoning field of artificial intelligence, these lost souls are ripe for exploitation. Science of mind teaches us to expect these changes, to embrace them and roll with them. For this is how the universe works. Nothing is static, and very little is predictable. With close to 8 billion people sending thoughts out into the universe thousands of times per day, the ricochets alone make it a miracle that anyone's dreams come true. And yet the common consciousness continues to arc toward our return to spiritual energy. Proof that love will win out in the end. Simple, unadorned, gentle love. Constant giving, building, never judging. The slow, steady tortoise keeping its eye focused on the prize. Bending the common consciousness is akin to saving the Earth from an asteroid strike. A successful mission meets the threat far out in space with minimal force. Just a slight nudge prevents catastrophic consequences. But wait for that threat to be on our doorstep, and the amount of force required can be as dangerous as the asteroid itself. Is artificial intelligence the gunpowder of the information age? Is artificial intelligence opening the door to our eventual downfall? Are we smart enough Secure enough in our unity to discern reality from fantasy? Did AI write this talk? 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 Ernest Holmes insisted the science of mind always remain open at the top. It must never be allowed to bog down in dogma that must be adhered to just because it has always been done that way. The science of mind encourages us to break traditions, seek out new normals, expand our horizons, and encompass new ideas. Then challenge them. Peel them open and examine them for inconsistencies with what we know to be true. Give them a test drive and see if they feel good on the road. Spirit guides us. We'll know when it's right. Artificial intelligence could be a harbinger of the last days of the last days. These could be the last days where people lock themselves to beliefs that no longer serve them, authorities who lie to and abuse them. The last days of pumping ourselves up by knocking others down, believing we can only win by making others lose. The last days of living in fear that we are not enough, we don't measure up. The last days of comparing ourselves to the Joneses and worrying about what others think of us. If these are the last days of our choosing to deny our spiritual truth, then I guess we really are facing a biblical scale tempest if keeping all those things defines our happiness. Personally, I'm glad to see the last of those days and recall the immortal words of President Josiah Bartlett in the TV show The West Wing, when he would simply ask, "What's next, Mrs. Landingham? What's next?" Thank you.